The jungle holds its breath. In the half-light before dawn, every leaf, every vine, every slick curve of bamboo seems to whisper around the 6 men lying motionless beneath the canopy. The air is thick, wet enough to cling to the skin, heavy enough to make each inhalation feel like swallowing warm mist. Ripple-sole boots settle deeper into mud. Webbing lies flat. No one shifts. No one clears a throat. Even the heartbeat becomes something to discipline. Because somewhere beyond the timberline, the Viet Cong are coming. Not a squad, not a platoon. A regimental patrol, more than 100 strong, slipping through the darkness in a long, deliberate column. Their sandals make almost no noise on the forest floor, just the faint brush of woven rubber against leaves. Yet to the 6 Australians, trained to decode the smallest tremor of the bush, the sound is unmistakable. It is mass. It is a movement. It is intentional. And it is coming straight toward a path that never existed until tonight. The Australians had carved it, not with machetes or brute force, but with the gentle, almost artistic precision of bushcraft. A few angled branches here, a cleared depression there, a suggestion, not a trail, a subtle visual cue that only a tracker's eye would trust, enough to make a hardened VC scout tilt his head, reassess, and begin drifting in this direction rather than the one he originally intended. That was the point. 6 commandos manipulating the instincts of men who had spent years mastering these jungles. The impossible became the plan. The Australians had been dropped far ahead of the enemy's anticipated route hours earlier, landing like ghosts into terrain thick enough to swallow sound whole. Their mission wasn't to ambush, overwhelm, or even engage. It was stranger, quieter. They were there to shape movement, to bend the jungle around an enemy regiment without revealing themselves, without firing a shot, without leaving a footprint that could betray their position. A task requiring discipline so absolute it bordered on the unnatural. In the gray before dawn, the 6 men blended into the terrain until they were not soldiers at all, but pieces of forest debris. Moisture clung to camouflage. Sweat trickled down spines, but no one brushed it away. Leeches found skin and fed. Still no movement. A mosquito whined close to a nostril and was inhaled rather than swatted. Silence was the real weapon here. Silence and the reading of the country, that instinctive, almost spiritual Australian ability to interpret the land's smallest signals. A bent reed, a patch of freshly turned earth, the absence of bird calls. Lessons learned not just on military ranges, but on childhood camping trips, hunting excursions, long patrols across the Northern Territory. Tonight those instincts were the difference between being hunters and being prey. Through the trees, a faint glimmer of motion appeared, the first shadow of the regiment's forward scout. He paused, scanning the darkness, fingers brushing a branch that had been angled deliberately by Australian hands. He did not know it was a signpost. He did not know it had been placed there for him. He simply trusted what experience told him. This direction looks natural. He moved, and 100 men behind him followed. As the column reoriented, the forest around the 6 Australians seemed to shift its weight. The air thickened. The floor trembled slightly as dozens of feet pressed damp soil. One of the commandos, a corporal known for his steady nerves, felt the vibration travel up his ribcage. He counted the heartbeats between each footstep, using rhythm to map distance. 30 meters, 25, 20. The enemy was now so close he could smell the faint tang of sweat carried on humid air. Seconds stretched. Time dilated. What seemed like minutes ticked by with no sound but breathing, Vietnamese breathing, Australian breathing, 2 opposing forces bound by a silence neither wanted to break first. One wrong exhale could expose everything. But the Australians had trained for this, controlling sound signature, controlling body weight, controlling fear, training that emphasized patience over aggression, waiting over acting. Knowing when not to fire was its own form of mastery. A representative anecdote from after the war recalled one commando describing this exact kind of moment. The jungle's so close you feel like if you blink too hard, the branches will rattle. Tonight felt exactly like that. the line between man and terrain dissolving completely. The regiment passed. The six did not move. Even after the last scout melted into the trees, they held still for a full count of 60. Not out of hesitation, but out of respect for the fact that silence has aftershocks. That sound can radiate long after one thinks danger has gone. Only then, with the jungle returning to breath, did the first Australian lift a single finger in a slow, deliberate motion. A signal, a release, a reminder that the burning question now demanded an answer. How did 6 men make a regiment walk exactly where they wanted, and vanish into quiet without ever being seen? The real explanation lay not in weapons, but in instinct, in discipline, and in a tactic the Americans never fully embraced. Long before a patrol is seen, long before an ambush is triggered, long before a scout senses danger, the forest announces who belongs and who does not. It does this not with words but with texture, with rhythm, with the soft percussion of leaves, branches, and earth disturbed in very particular ways. To the trained ear, the jungle is a living sensor system, broadcasting warnings through sound. And in Vietnam, that sound often revealed something uncomfortable. Americans were loud, not intentionally, not carelessly, loud in the way a machine is loud, efficient, powerful, and designed for momentum rather than subtlety. They carried more weight, more metal, more radios, more grenades, more everything. Their boots hit the ground at a steady, mechanical pace. Their webbing clicked. Their M16 sling swivels clacked against polymer stocks. Even their conversations, often necessary for coordinating complex maneuvers, produced a kind of human static that the jungle amplified rather than dampened. The Australians heard all of it, because they had trained to hear differently. To understand the contrast, imagine a typical American platoon moving through the bush in 1967. A representative account from after-action interviews often describes it like this: 30 to 40 soldiers advancing with discipline, each man spaced out, rifles at the ready. But beneath that discipline lay a quiet storm of noise. Boots, heavy, deep-treaded jungle boots, hit the ground in an unmistakable thud. The weight of gear caused metal canteens to tap against webbing. Claymore bags rustled. Someone always whispered. Someone always adjusted their pack. Someone always stepped on a branch they didn't see. None of it seemed loud at the moment. To the jungle, it was thunder. Viet Cong units learned to read that thunder like a weather pattern. Many ambushes occurred long before Americans even sensed they were being watched. Their strength, numbers, firepower, coordination came with the cost of predictability. Sound became part of their footprint, and that is the sound the Americans couldn't hear, the sound of their own presence. Australian doctrine approached the problem from the opposite direction. Rather than overpower the environment, they absorbed it. Silence wasn't just a tactic, it was an identity. Recruits learned this on training lanes carved through the dense bush of Queensland and the Northern Territory, where the first lesson wasn't marksmanship, it was listening. Listening until the forest's baseline hum became familiar enough that anything out of place felt like an alarm bell. One training exercise became almost folklore. A lane where instructors released a bird known for its piercing alarm call directly above the trainees. At the first chirp, recruits were expected to freeze mid-stride, 1 foot raised, muscles locked, lungs barely moving for minutes at a time. Failure wasn't punished with yelling, it was punished with repetition, again and again, until stillness became muscle memory. Stillness made them invisible. Gear was modified to match the philosophy. Ripple-sole boots with their soft, wavy pattern allowed weight to settle gently, spreading pressure so the ground accepted it rather than resisted it. Every piece of metal, buckles, slings, canteens, magazines, was wrapped, taped, or stowed so securely that even a stumble produced nothing sharper than a dull thud. The L1A1 SLR rifle, a heavy steel semi-automatic, was carried at balance. One hand on the forestock, weight distributed evenly through the body so it didn't swing, didn't clatter, didn't betray a careless moment. Movement followed a different rhythm too. Australians didn't march by a watch or a cadence. They moved on the beat of the land, stepping only when the forest masked them, when wind pushed branches, when rain drummed on broad leaves, when insects rose in a sudden chorus. Nature offered cover and they took it. If the land was silent, they were silent. If the land paused, they paused. To the Americans, this felt maddeningly slow. To the Australians, it was survival. One American officer, quoted in post-war recollections, described training beside Australians with quiet admiration tinged with frustration. You'd blink and they were gone. Not far, just gone. He respected their stealth. Many did, but replicating it was another matter. American logistics, doctrine, and operational tempo made it difficult to adopt such extreme quietness. A platoon carrying 3 radios simply could not move like a 6-man recon team. Missions requiring overwhelming firepower could not be executed with the delicate touch of a tracker. Silence was a weapon, but a specialized one. The Australians wielded it with an instinct many Americans acknowledged but rarely mastered. That frustration worked both ways. Australian patrol commanders sometimes listened to nearby American units moving through the jungle and felt a kind of dread on their behalf. Noise attracts attention. Attention attracts fire. Fire attracts casualties, and the jungle was not forgiving. It did not care who had the better rifles or the larger helicopters. It rewarded only one thing: harmony with its soundscape. The fear came not from the enemy, but from the idea that the Americans didn't hear what the jungle was trying to tell them. A cracking branch here, a too fast footstep there, a radio click at the wrong moment. These were tiny signals, invisible to the eye but deafening to anyone trained to listen. And that is why the lure, the deceptive corridor sculpted by 6 silent Australians, could exist at all. The Americans could not have done it, because they could not have moved without being known. The trap never began with firepower. It began with fingertips pressed against the earth. Before the sun had lifted above the canopy, the Australian patrol was already reading the ground like a coded message. To them, terrain wasn't scenery, it was a living map, layered with signs, hints, and quiet confessions of movement. Every bent blade of grass, every thread of disturbed leaf litter, every half-print softened by dew spoke about who had passed when they moved and what they intended. Bushcraft wasn't a supplement to combat. It was the architecture of survival. And this morning, it was the architecture of deception. One of the commandos knelt beside a stand of bamboo where a single shoot had snapped at an angle no wider than a thumbnail. It was fresh. The fibers were still moist. He touched it with the back of his knuckle, feeling the soft give beneath the hardened outer skin. Broken within the last hour, maybe less. The Viet Cong advance guard had come through here, and they'd been moving with speed. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. A simple hand signal, 2 fingers, 1 downward sweep, told the rest of the patrol everything. Direction of movement and probable pace. They adjusted formation without a whisper, each man sinking deeper into the green shadow of the bush. The jungle was tight here, the air thick with moisture, and lantana vines clutched at their sleeves. Every touch became a negotiation. Push too hard and branches snapped. Move too fast and leaf litter shifted unnaturally. But the Australians had trained for exactly this kind of intimacy with country. Their palms learned to slide over bark without altering its pattern. Their feet learned to settle into mud without leaving a clear edge. They didn't conquer the terrain, they blended into it. Ahead lay the corridor they intended to shape. Not a path in the traditional sense. Not cleared. Not marked. Just a subtle flow of features the enemy scouts would recognize. A cluster of vines trimmed at waist height, as though someone had passed with quiet urgency. A small patch of earth compressed in a way that suggested weight had recently shifted atop it. A faint game trail, gently disturbed, hinting at movement continuing deeper into the scrub. To an untrained eye, nothing was amiss. To a Viet Cong scout, everything was significant. This was the heart of the deception, using the enemy's own expertise against them. Before placing even a single indicator, the team huddled in a tight circle, shoulders nearly touching. Their breathing stayed controlled. Their eyes scanned in every direction. But their focus was inward on the debate playing out in whispers thinner than mist. "Cut here," one suggested, pointing at a vine that naturally arched across the ankle-height opening. "Too sharp," another whispered back. "They'll know it was deliberate." A third man knelt, palming the earth. "We disturbed this patch just slightly, enough to imply someone stepped here, then moved fast, pulls them left." "Left leads into the funnel," the patrol commander murmured. "That's where we want them." Every decision carried weight. One misjudged disturbance, one unnatural line in the vegetation, and the entire regiment might sense something wrong. The Australians weren't hiding trap wires or explosives, they were hiding intention. A far subtler thing. Bushcraft wasn't just about moving silently, it was about thinking like the land. Sign cutting, the methodical reading of footprints, displaced soil, compressed vegetation, was only half the craft. The other half was sign-making. Not crude tampering, but sculpting the ground so it whispered the story the Australians needed the enemy to believe. Another unit had passed through here, hurried, careless, heading deeper into cover. The Viet Cong would follow instinctively, seeking to gain advantage by tracking them. The Australians trusted that instinct. They also feared it, because if the VC realized the signs were false, if even one scout smelled deception, 6 men would face a regiment closing in on them from every flank. No air support, no reinforcing platoons, just the jungle, the silence, and the weight of their own gamble. A commando brushed his fingertips over damp leaves, feeling where natural moisture ended, and a thin streak of dryness began, a proof of an earlier disturbance. They imagined how a VC tracker would interpret it. Someone brushed past here less than an hour ago. Someone moving carefully. Someone worth following. The Australians replicated the pattern 20 meters ahead, then again another 30 beyond that. Not identical, never identical. Nature didn't repeat itself perfectly, so neither could they. Each sign had to feel organic, connected yet irregular. Their pride hummed beneath the tension. Pride in a skill that didn't rely on lasers or satellites. Pride in training that taught them to see the world not in shapes but in stories. Yet the fear was real too. A single snapped twig could betray everything. A careless footstep could fracture the silence. A momentary lapse in camouflage discipline, a sleeve catching morning light, a glint of metal from an untaped buckle could draw eyes, then rifles, then the regiment itself. The Australians worked knowing the jungle had no sympathy for error. They feel the regiment before they see it, a low tremor in the jungle's sound floor, like pressure building inside the earth. 6 men breathe in unison beneath the canopy, spaced just far enough apart that even a stray glance wouldn't link them as a team. The point man, crouched in a thicket of lawyer vine, freezes. A shift, faint, almost imagined, rolls across the undergrowth. Not a footstep, not even a snapped twig, just the jungle subtly reacting to movement. He raises one finger, then curls it downward. The hand signal ripples back through the patrol like electricity. No sound, no words, just 6 shadows adjusting their posture. They are not blocking the regiment, they are shaping it, forming an invisible wall of human intent. Ahead, the Viet Cong scouts correct their bearing. Australians have laid their hints carefully. A faint game trail brushed the wrong way, a barely disturbed patch of earth that suggests a previous patrol passed through hours earlier. To the trained VCI, it reads as enemy movement. To the Australians, it is a silent shepherd's staff. The column begins to drift, 5 meters, then 20, then an entire body-length shift in the direction the commandos intended. Slowly, the regiment flows toward the dead-ground valley, a sunken fold in the terrain that swallows sound and exposes movement patterns like ink on paper. The commandos don't celebrate. They simply listen, counting footfalls, logging unit spacing, reading the regiment's structure as it unknowingly walks into their funnel. Fear bites at them. One wrong step and the jungle would erupt with 100 rifles. but awe sits beside it, a realization that 6 men, using only silence and craft, are steering a force capable of erasing them in seconds. Rain arrives as if summoned, a thick tropical curtain that muffles every sound. For the Australians, it's a gift. Each drop striking the canopy becomes a cover, a natural smokescreen. The 6 commandos begin their withdrawal, muscles trembling from hours of motionless tension. Their SLRs feel heavier than rifles should. Webbing straps bite into shoulders rubbed raw. The jungle smells of wet clay and crushed leaf mulch, the scent of survival. Before slipping out, the SIG's operator kneels in the mud, jotting quick notes beneath a poncho corner. Estimated troop numbers, spacing between companies, radio call signs caught faintly through intercepted chatter, and a glimpse of unit markers worn by passing platoon leaders. It's intelligence gold, the sort that reshapes maps and confirms months of reconnaissance. Then, with practiced ease, he wipes the area clean, leaving no trace that a man had ever knelt there. By the time they reach the extraction point, the rain has soaked them to the bone. But they're alive, and the regiment they shaped never fired a shot. Hours later, during a joint debrief, American advisors pore over the results. They're impressed, even stunned. But there's an unspoken truth hanging in the room. They cannot replicate this. Not because they lack courage, but because this tactic requires something doctrine cannot be mass-produced: deep bushcraft, cultural intuition with terrain, and months of slow, patient training in a reading country. American units operated with weight, radios, firepower, and tempo. Australians moved with minimal gear, long-range instincts, and a willingness to let silence do the work. The Commandos walked away unseen. The Viet Cong Regiment never learned they had been guided, like water channeled through a hidden gutter, by 6 shadows who vanished into the rain.